Hey you guys, and what's up? Good afternoon and welcome to the Prime Vanguard channel. My name is Cassius and I'll be showing you my take on the overdress deck profile for Dragon Empire. Now this was the very first deck introduced to all of us from overdress, and I have to admit that it is my most least favorite deck until I actually started playing it, and then I realized how much fun and amazing potential that this deck will have later in the game of Vanguard. Now, with it being the main deck from the main character of the Overdress anime, I do expect to see a lot of new cards and interesting mechanics that this deck introduces to us, as Overdress itself is completely new with the introduction of Trickstar and the other Vairinas. And playing this deck, I got to see where this mechanic can go and some of the unique applications that it has, especially with its main grade 3 being Vairina Valiente, and some of the cool things that this card will be able to do later in the future. Especially as the time that I'm making this video, we just got done seeing the full set list 2 cards of the Brush with Legends and seeing what cards are going to be with that, and just seeing all the new Vairinas and the new Dragon Empire support for the deck. I'm very excited to see all the stuff that will come when I make later deck profiles once that set drops. But without further ado, you guys, today I'm going to go ahead and showcase to you my Nirvana deck profile. So let's go ahead and get started on that right away. Alright, you guys, so to get started off with the ride line, we have the trial deck ride line for the Trickstar deck. Seeing as how our deck's playstyle is revolved around Trickstar, we really want to be able to make sure that we can search our deck out and find Trickstar and Vairina to make sure that we have a beginning setup for our overdress plays. Our main grade 3 Nirvana, which is the ride target for our deck, is going to help us apply more power and more pressure as we acquire more overdress units on the board, and being able to recycle Trickstar out from the drop zone is going to be very important later in the game. This lineup is perfect. It gives us a good consistency of board building and resource management, as you can search out the grade 0 and search out the grade 2 later in the game, so that this way you have it on the board and set up for you when you go to your grade 3 turns. Alright, so to get started off with the main deck, I play 3 copies of Chakrabarthi Dragon Nirvana. Nirvana is our main grade 3 of the deck, so making sure that we can see as many copies of it as possible to increase our chances of persona riding is extremely important. It's also our main grade 3 and the best card for our Trickstar strategy, as its first ability lets us recycle out the grade 0s that we have from our drop zone to call it to the rearguard circle, meaning that because Trickstar is grade 0, we always have access to it from just discarding a card from our hand. And then its second ability lets us get power to itself and to our other overdress units that are in our front row, potentially giving us 10,000 power to the front row, as we'll have multiple units that have the overdress onto them. Means that expect to be seeing really big swings at our opponent that are going to be over 23,000. And remember that overdress, because the shield values have changed of the card, 10,000 shield is now a bit of an awkward number, as the cards go from 5,000 to 15,000 in terms of shield and defense. So Nirvana being able to create that weird guarding setup right away is really amazing as an offensive grade 3. It doesn't do too much else in terms of resource management, but in terms of pressure in just sticking straight to our overdress strategy, this card is amazing as your main grade 3 for the deck. For our next grade 3, we play 4 copies of Vairina Valiente. Vairina Valiente is the star child of the very first set of Card Fight Vanguard Overdress. This card is your main offensive overdress ride target, as this is the unit that gets additional power for the number of dress units that's going to have on top of it, as you can acquire more of them as long as you have Trickstar. And he's also our main pressure unit, as if his attack were to hit an opponent, you can counterblast 1 and then discard a card from your hand to get a restand off this card. It is only once per turn, meaning that once that first attack hits, you only get 1 restand off this card, meaning that the deck changes from a 3 to 4 attack deck. But the fact that we have access to this extra attack through the form of pressure is really amazing, because your opponent's going to want to always use cards from their hand to stop this attack, so you don't generate additional attacks for the turn, which could potentially be lethal to them later in the game. Plus, this card gets 5,000 power and it's an overdress unit, so combined with Nirvana, you're already at 28,000 power, which is extremely dangerous in overdress, because that goes past that 15-point shield limit unless your opponent pulls a defensive. But that's more than 10,000 shield already, unless, yes, there'll be more than 10,000 shield already, because you'll have a booster on top of that with the skill. So you're already making really great numbers, and this card being able to do that by itself with Nirvana is extremely amazing. Moving on to my grade 2s, I play 3 copies of Burn Bright Pure Prayers. Now, Burn Bright Pure Prayers is a Blitz Order card and it has the following ability where if your damage zone has 3 or more cards, you choose one of your units and it gets plus 15,000 power until the end of that battle. Now, the reason why I'm playing 3 copies of this is because in this deck, I play a lot of grade 0s, and grade 0s only have the 5,000 point shields, especially the normal unit ones like Trickstar, meaning that they don't have the 15k or even the 10,000 point shield bonus like they used to in the past. So realistically, I'm playing with a lot less defense in my deck than I normally would be, and having Burn Bright Pure Prayers gets to slow our opponent down. This deck doesn't generate a lot of card advantage through forms of drawing except through skills, and even then it's still not enough as you're using those cards from your hand to generate more pressure onto your board. So having Burn Bright Pure Prayers to slow our opponent down is extremely amazing, as once you get to that 3 damage limit, you can play this card to shut down their next few attacks. For my next grade 2, I play 4 copies of Vairina Arcs. Vairina Arcs is without a doubt the best grade 2 in the deck and second best card in the deck, simply because this card as an overdress on place is counterblast 1, draw 2, and get 5,000 power. Straightforward, +2, really amazing card. Having a card like this just helps us go through our deck faster, and you really want to max it out, as this ability isn't once per turn, but if you have multiple Trickstars in play, that means that you can potentially get, for a counterblast 2, a draw 4 if you wanted to go double Vairina Arcs in order to get more cards. Moving on to my next grade 2, I am playing 4 copies of the generic Vairina. This version of Vairina is the one that you were able to search out with your ride chain. It's also the start to your ride chain with the rearguard Trickstar strategy setup. The reason why I'm playing for this is because it's mainly just an overdress unit and it gets you a board retire. There's really no other purpose of this card other than the fact that being able to have a card that gets you into overdress right away that's searchable is extremely important, especially if I want to go and stack more cards with Vairina Valiente. Having a card that can do more overdress stackings is very important. So this card really just helps us get our early overdress games play off. It doesn't really serve any other purpose. The retire ability is nice, but because it costs 2 Soul Blasts, it can be costly, and sometimes you might be able to use this ability once. So if you are going to retire something, just be sure that it's the card that you really want to retire on your opponent's side of the board. Now for my grade 1s. So I play 2 copies of Extremist Dragon Velocihazard. So this deck is really all about making big numbers and attacking your opponent with a lot of pressure, in case you just haven't gotten the gist of the deck. This deck doesn't really do too much else other than the most simplest things that a Vanguard deck can do, like getting power, drawing, retiring, but it makes really good numbers. And right now in the early phases of overdress, that's actually a big deal, as a lot of decks don't really have like the best cards to defend against attacks versus getting resources back. So even though it's only a 10k booster, a 10k booster to an attack that's already over 18k or more puts you at 28,000. Eventually, this card is probably the most flexible one in the deck that can be replaced, so depending on what comes out in the future, the deck will change. But I like playing Velocihazard just because it makes better numbers for our already attacking units that are going to be in the overdress state on top of their Nirvana boost. My next grade 1 is 2 copies of Blaze Maiden Rino. I play 2 copies of Blaze Maiden Rino, mainly just because she's sort of like an early game offensive card. This deck without this card in the Trickstar doesn't really do too much otherwise in the early game, so having this card to apply some early game pressure is really cool. And even if you put it behind Velocihazard or even as a booster, it just means that you have a card that can swing for 10k later in the game. So having this just to help with my early game pressure is extremely helpful and just a personal choice of mine. But again, like Velocihazard, it's another flexible spot for in the future. For my last grade 1, I'm playing 4 copies of the Dragon Empire Sentinel Twin Buckler Dragon. The Dragon Empire Sentinel, really good perfect guard, does the same thing as all the other Sentinels. Not much to say about this card other than the fact that you do want this over the regular one because of its ability. And now for our grade 0s. I'm playing 4 copies of Trickstar. Trickstar is the main star of the show. And in my deck profile and just playing this, testing this deck over and over again, originally I was only playing 2 copies of this, and the reason why I was only playing 2 copies of Trickstar was because I was thinking that having Nirvana and being able to just discard from your hand and calling it over and over again was actually something that was like reasonable to me, and I felt like I was going to use this for the other space. But over time I realized that when you can't get to your Trickstar, when you only have one, and that's just the one that you have from the search, and you want to create multiple overdress units, you are going to want to see more of those cards and seeing more Trickstar units. And this deck doesn't have any way of searching out grade zeros besides your ride chain from the one that you get already. So you really want to be able to max out the number of Trickstars you have to generate as many overdress units on the board as you can, so that this way on your Nirvana turns you get the most offensive turns as possible. And for my one over trigger of the deck, it is the Dragon Deity King of Resurgence Dragveda. This card is amazing. It gives your Vanguard a second Vanguard attack, meaning more twin drive and an additional 1 million power to any one of your units, which you're definitely going to put on Vairina Valiente, so that this way it goes through and then you get to swing with a million point unit twice. The effect to restain your Vanguard, it's strong. It makes sense for this being like a Kagero based card, and the extra Vanguard attack does help, especially with Nirvana, because you're already swinging for such big numbers. And now moving on to my triggers, I play 8 critical, 4 copies of Conduct Spark Dragon, 4 copies of Blaze Maiden Zonne, and I play 3 draw triggers, which is 3 copies of Blaze Staff Monk Cho Kun Sha. Now, the draw triggers I am on the fence about, and the only reason why I say that is because draw triggers are cool because you get to go through your deck faster. But what I mean by on the fence about is I'm thinking about increasing my draw triggers into the deck. Yes, we have cards like Vairina and we can search them out, and Vairina Arcs, we get some more draw power, but in the deck you are going to notice that there are other cards that you want on the board and other key pieces that you want to play. So being able to draw more cards out from your deck is going to be extremely helpful. Even though draw triggers are short and shield value, it doesn't really matter because offensively speaking, you'll just be taking away so much from your opponent that you don't even be guarding much. And you have the grade 2 order card that gets you 15k on defense, so a 5k shield actually won't become that bad in that scenario. Fronts are bad for this deck. Fronts don't really do anything. You're already swinging for big numbers. Fronts just give you bigger numbers, but not as much pressure because they're not going critical. And you need the resource management from the draws. Finally, 4 heal triggers, which is 4 copies of Blaze Maiden Rona. Alright y'all, so that is it for the deck profile. Now, my final thoughts on Nirvana and the overdress playstyle in general. Nirvana first is that I do think that this deck is really strong. It has the most simplest playstyle besides Prison from all the trial decks. You can make really big numbers, generate really large attacks because you are in the overdress state, and then being in overdress gives you a lot of really good effects. A lot of your cards increase power on their own, meaning that you are going to be demanding a lot of shield from your opponent in the later game when you do start doing overdress attacks. You have draw power, you have retire, you have reoccurring effects with Nirvana, being able to get your Trickstar back. So overdress is something that you'll be able to really take advantage of in this deck. My one issue with this deck is that other than generating 3 big attacks 9 times out of 10, this deck doesn't do anything else. Like, there's nothing else that's wow about this deck. The deck doesn't have really good resource management, so you can't even use the retiring Vairina over and over again. You can't recycle overdress units in this deck. Your Trickstar loses value over time, or its value depends on what overdress units that you have, because if you don't have any overdress units, then you essentially just have a bunch of grade zeros on the board that isn't really that offensive for a turn. And that's really all that is to say about Nirvana. It's a very simple, straightforward deck. You generate 3 big strong attacks and that's it. And once your opponent learns how to play around that, then you got to figure something else out, but unfortunately you won't be able to because there's not much else you can do. Persona writing helps, but again, you're just adding power on top of the power that you already have. It's really just finding something that makes the deck scary for your opponent to deal with later in the game. And Valiente is your only form of pressure that you have in the deck that lets you do that. That is all for this deck profile, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's deck profile, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video with any of your friends thinking about building Nirvana. Go ahead and tell me what you thought about this deck profile in the comment section below, and subscribe to the channel for plenty of other deck profiles coming out. So that's all for today, you guys. See you later.